So, yeah, why am I sitting here today? Well, it all started out when I came to iOS. So who knows me kind of knows already that I'm quite into testing and I really love testing. So one of the first things I did was evaluating how to set up a proper testing environment. And well, it took me some days to figure out. I learned a lot and also had a lot of conversations with Yiri because he was also doing it already. And once I got it done, I put out this tweet and was really proud and said, yeah, I got this testing environment done. I had G8 unit, OC mock, OC Hamcrest, together with Jenkins and Git. So yeah, mastered. A lot of tools put together and it worked. Well, then I got this answer from my friend, Max. Hey, why don't you just use Kiwi instead of G8 unit, OC mock, and OC Hamcrest? Yeah, that's a good idea. Let's look into it. And yeah, this was the beginning of a love with Kiwi. And Kiwi is testing with style. And I want to show you today why I like it so much, what's so special about this testing framework, and want to inspire you maybe to also find a similar testing framework for your language of choice. The main thing I'm going to talk today about is the way how you test with Kiwi, and this is behavior-driven development. Who of you heard about BDD already? Okay, it's like almost 50%. So until I started with iOS and iPhone development, I always used unit testing. Unit testing is a typical and probably most common way how to do testing. I'm going to show some examples in a minute. The thing is, Kiwi supports both. So you can use unit testing as well because it integrates with OC unit, which is the most common in Xcode integrated testing environment. And it uses also then test case, so you can easily also migrate your existing tests and still use unit tests. But I think the real power is in behavior-driven development. So I want to focus on this one now. So talking about behavior-driven development, there are main two differences to unit testing. One is the structure, and the other one, especially in this kind of framework, it's about the assertion part. How do you set up your expectations and make sure that the results that you get are valid? So let's have a look first on the structure. This is a typical unit testing setup. So you have a bunch of functions which have quite long method names because you try to describe your test inside the method name. And when you do some testing, you will probably also would have noticed already that you quite often get in this situation where you want to test a function, but you want to pass in slightly different data, and then you start writing function names where you just have a small difference in the names because you have different setup conditions or whatever. So in this unit testing, you're always kind of restricted in this one-dimensional setup. You just have one before all function that can be called to do main setup, but it's the same for all of your tests. And the main difference now in behavior-driven development is, or especially in the way how this framework implements it, is that you can nest your tests. And also, you don't use method names to describe what you test. Instead, you use strings, like really human-readable text. So you start out in the beginning with this describe tag, where you say what kind of functionality you want to test. So in this case, always a class name. And then you can put a lot of different contexts. And for each context, you can then either nest further context if you want to get more concrete. And in the end, once you reach the target context, you just describe your tests in this it statements. So when you read it, it's already kind of makes a kind of good readable sentence. So it should do whatever in this context for this class. And the nice thing is also the framework generates a complete sentence for you once it's compiled and something fails. Because then it would read, for example, shopping cart, add item. When the cart is empty, should add the item to this cart. And that's it. So for developing, it's quite easy, nicely structured. And especially what is important, you can put specific setup logic in a before each in each context. So if you want to do some common setup logic for this context, you just put it inside here, and all your tests that are running in this context get the same setup. and you don't have to do it on a function level or something. That's really cool. The second part is about assertions. So I brought some examples from iOS. iOS is usually, Objective-C is a quite verbose language, and when you look at this, you will probably agree. This is a typical OC unit assertion for object equality. So stay assert equal objects result item, and then if you don't want to describe anything, you just have to pass in here. So sucks.
This is C.
And what's already better is OC Hamcrest. It's probably everyone knows Hamcrest already. It's available for all kind of languages, and also in iOS, it makes already much better readable. You can read assert that result equal to item. So that's already much better. And Kiwi is kind of similar. It's also short, but it has a different approach. It follows a common syntax on how you formulate stuff. So it looks like this. Result should equal item. That's quite nice short. And what you can see here, if you're familiar to Objective-C, it basically calls, kind of calls methods on the object itself that you want to test. So here, the should is actually kind of a method that you call on the result. Well, and if you come from ActionScript or any kind of static type language, you will say, oh, what? How can this be? There is no should. And this is really the cool thing about Objective-C, that you can extend classes with these categories. So in this case, I don't want to go too much into detail. In the end, it calls a method on this class that in the original class doesn't exist, but for testing frameworks, it gets added. And therefore, you get all this matcher functionality. And it's really cool. The last thing I want to cover is mocking, because when you do testing, it's always kind of related. You have to do mocking if you don't want to test the dependencies of your classes under test. And here you will also see the same pattern. It's always the same pattern. First of all, in the first line, which is also quite cool, and it's also because of this categories in Objective-C, you can, let's imagine we want to test this card class. So instead of using some kind of generic mock functionality of a framework, you can just call on this class mock, and it gives back a mock object of this class. And then in the middle part, you can see how you define an expectation. So in this case, we expect that when we call this method remove all, it should return true when Objective-C is yes. So Boolean. And then once I call card remove all, it would return this Boolean with the value yes. So this is a very basic example. There's much more sophisticated stuff possible. It's really cool. It's yeah, just check it out then. Yeah, so give it a try. I really fell in love, not only because of Objective-C language that supports this kind of syntax. If you're coming from Ruby, you kind of know this syntax already because it's basically a port of RSpecs. Try to find maybe something in your language of choice. I already looked into ActionScript. The only thing I found was kind of a proof of concept from actually this guy who wrote me on Twitter. So yeah, maybe I was not looking for long enough. So it has this really nice structure, the nice assertion, and it already comes with all kind of related stuff like mocking, stubbing. It's really complete and has a quite active open source community. I also contributed already. It's really fun. And yeah, so you can find it on GitHub. And if you have any questions, just approach me. I'm really happy to explain you more stuff to convince you to use it. Okay, so any questions so far?
Is it hard to set up?
No, it's
targets and all this relations?
It's actually quite easy because it builds on top of OC unit. So if you can set up OC unit, it's basically the same. We also use it on Jenkins. It's exactly the same script that Jiri uses for his test setup. Especially in the latest version, they also fixed the output, so you get even this, even though you have this nested contexts Even on Jenkins, you get a proper readable sentence and for the running, parsing and fading tests. So it's really cool.